What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to Unit 1, Part 3. This is the last part of Unit 1. We're doing Enlightenment, Major Thinkers, and the Effects. Before we get into the new stuff, just a quick little refresher review from the last video. We were talking about the Enlightenment. The first thing was the historical circumstance or context. I'm going to keep coming back to this term a lot because it is constantly something that you're going to see on the Regents exam, and I want you to be familiar with it over the course of the year so it's in your mind. It's kind of singed into your brain. And the historical context or circumstance is really just the causes. So what led to something? And in this case, we're talking about what led to the Enlightenment. And there were two things that went on. One, we have these absolute monarchs who are all around the world, and it's really the main form of government at the time. And the other one is scientific revolution. And if you remember, the scientific revolution is all about new ideas and new thoughts. People come up with new inventions and new ways of looking at the world. Instead of the Bible being the answer for everything, it's observation and experimentation. And people start saying, if science is based on laws, maybe human interaction is based on laws as well. Maybe we need to figure out if we're naturally good or naturally evil. And so this whole period of the Enlightenment is really about new ideas and natural rights. What rights are people entitled to? What rights do people deserve? What are people born with? And we talked about John Locke and his belief in life, liberty, and property, which gets us into this stuff for today. So these are a couple thinkers, some ideas that come out of this, just some important people who are really going to have an influence when new democracies are going to be created in the next time period or when we get to Unit 2. So first one is this guy. His name is Baron de Montesquieu, which is he's French, if you can't tell by the pronunciation and the spelling. Montesquieu is going to write about three branches of government. So he is the originator of this idea that we need what are called checks and balances. So he describes in detail and really comes up with this idea of three branches, which is the basis of the U.S. government today. We have three branches. One is the legislative branch. They are the ones that make the laws. That would be Congress in the United States, if you look at our federal level. The second is the judicial branch. They evaluate laws to see whether or not those laws violate the rules of the country. Which is the main branch that does that, or the main piece of the judicial branch today. The top is the Supreme Court. We also have a bunch of federal courts and other appeals courts in this country. And then executive branch. And the executive branch carries out the laws. They take the laws and they implement them and put them into place, which is led essentially by the President of the United States and the White House and the bureaucracy or the group of people that are underneath it. So he believes that all three of these branches should be equal in power, and each one should check the other to make sure that doesn't get too powerful. Remember, the fear is absolute monarchy. We want a democracy. So if each branch checks the other one and each is equal in power, no branch gets powerful enough that they become essentially an absolute monarchy. So that's Montesquieu. Another guy is Rousseau right here. Really simple on Rousseau. He's super big into that we are born good, but society corrupts us. When we are born in a natural state of goodness and well-being, but we become corrupt and evil or create evil acts as a result of what society does for us. An example would be if you look at what impact that growing up in a certain household or have influence and how that impacts what people do as a result. And his biggest thing, he said, the number one thing, the biggest thing that corrupts us, or the biggest thing that causes us to create or to commit things like crime, is because of poverty. That people who are poor tend to commit crimes at a higher rate than people who are, say, wealthy, is in his view. And therefore that we need to make sure we get rid of this, what he considers to be an unequal distribution of wealth. That we have these really, really, especially back in his time, we have these really, really rich nobles and then a lot of poor peasants. And the poor peasants are willing to do stuff to feed their family and to get out of poverty or to try and avoid extreme poverty. And therefore that's the balance. His famous quote is, "Man is born free and everywhere is in chains," meaning that we are born free with an open mind, goodness, and then what happens as a result of what society does is it corrupts us. So that's Rousseau. We also have this one. She's a little different. Her name is Catherine the Great. She is actually a monarch. So she is essentially an absolute monarch, but she takes on some Enlightenment ideas. She sees what's going on. She's from Russia, Catherine the Great. She sees what's going on in France and these other places, and she wants to try and bring them into her country. She says, oh, look at all these Enlightenment, democracy things. Now, it's a little bit of a contradiction because she's an absolute monarch, but she's going to bring in some ideas that don't diminish her power. So, for example, she's going to say, we need more schools for children. And we need schools that aren't religious. And we need schools that are open to more kids, that not just the wealthiest of people, which back in the 1700s, only the wealthiest people are getting an education. And we want to make it more equitable, where we have people all across the board, almost the basis. And it wasn't necessarily public schooling back then, but almost what public schools allow, where no matter if you're rich or poor, you are entitled to an education. She's also going to change the law code. There's going to be a written law code in Russia. She allows for some Enlightenment ideas within there of certain ability to, for example, certain legal codes and trials and whatnot. She also is going to expand the border of Russia. So Russia is going to get very large during this time period. And you can see some of the areas that she pushes into is kind of modern day area that's still controversial today. So modern day Ukraine, these areas along the East Coast, or the Eastern Europe, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Even with this, she's still an absolute world. So she's our contradiction. She's called an enlightened monarch. So she has a little bit of Enlightenment ideas, but she's still a monarch. So, and then two groups. So there's two people. We're talking about all this enlightenment, freedom, yay, democracy. This is great. Life, liberty, property. You have the right to this and right to speech and all this good stuff. Fantastic. But there's two groups that are really being ignored here. And it's important to note that there are people who are talking about these two groups. One is women. Even if the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. That language of men, women are ignored in a lot of these writings of a lot of these thinkers. And when revolutions happen and these governments are formed in the 1700s, they ignore women for the most part. Here's one example of a woman who actually is educated and puts out these her own opinion on things. Her name is Mary Wollstonecraft. This is her right here. She's really going to focus on that. It's great that all these men are writing all this stuff, but women are entitled and should have equal education and job opportunities. It's not just a male thing. She really doesn't even get into the rights part yet. For the most part, it's really about her, that there should be an equal opportunity to excel and to succeed for women. And we would call her, and we're going to get to this term much later in this class and probably wait till the 1900s, but almost an early feminist, where she is pushing and promoting equality amongst women. So while the men are kind of ignoring this, there are some women writers who are doing that. The other thing that's being ignored is slavery. Slavery had been around in the Americas, at least, since the 1500s. Before that, in Europe, it goes way back in Europe. But in terms of especially African slavery, west coast of Africa, forcibly bringing people to the Americas, bringing people to Europe to work, that was going on from the 15 and 1600s, really the early 1600s. And when these Enlightenment ideas come up, some people are going to start saying, wait a second, you're talking about freedom and equality, and we all deserve the right to life, liberty, and property, or whatever, yet we have slavery. And that slave system is based on race. And that goes against everything that you Enlightenment thinkers are writing about. And one political leader in Britain who really starts pushing for and leads to a successful abolition of slavery, or at least the slave trade, is William Wilberforce. And he was a leader in England in the British Parliament, and he helps push to end it. This issue of slavery, if you know anything about U.S. history, is going to continue to be controversial in through the 1800s. This guy, William Wilberforce, was kind of on the cutting edge. And then even after slavery ends, the idea of equality between races and what are we entitled to based on these Enlightenment ideas as African Americans in the United States, do we deserve certain rights? How do we push for these rights? How do we get voting rights? And that goes all the way into the 1960s. So when push comes to shove, why care about this? Who cares about the Enlightenment? What's so important about it? Tell me, Mr. Purtis, what do I need to know? And here's the deal. There's two things. One, this period is super important because it inspires future revolutions. And that's the next unit that we're going to get into with American, French, South American, Haitian revolutions that are going to be inspired by this time period. These writers and thinkers aren't overthrowing governments. They're just writing about what they believe should be the best form of government. Second is these ideas are the foundation of almost every government today. Almost every government around the world, not everyone, but almost everyone, promotes these Enlightenment ideas in some way, shape, or form. And when they're violated, people throw their hands up and like, I can't believe you violated these rights. So that's what's important. If you got any questions, you got any issues, please let me know. Come to class, write it down. We'll talk later.